Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're on a roll. This is like, I think, week 3 or 4 where we have gone live. And today we have a special guest. Nikki is the host of a podcast called Can I Just Say? Where she explores vulnerability and resilience. So we're going to get into it today. But first, I just want to welcome you. I am based in Atlanta. Nikki, you are in tell me, you just told me, where are you again?
Vancouver, British Columbia.
Vancouver,
So it's really quite the opposite side.
the opposite side, but I want to know where you all are logging in from as well. So put that in the chat. And we want this to feel like an open discussion. So if you have a comment, a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. We'll try to get to it. If we don't, we'll give you our information so that you can reach out to us later. But without further ado, Nikki, I came across your Instagram, and I always kind of like look at videos, and whoever I have on, there has to be some kind of connection.
I get
And I
that.
came across a post that you were kind of just talking to your audience, and you were telling them that you can absolutely take control of your life once you understand who you are and what you want. And I was like, yes, because as a therapist, that's where we start, right? People come in and they have all of these presenting issues, and they want to talk about the other person and what they've been through. And I always go back and say, first of all, who are you and what do you want? What are your expectations? We have to start there. And so that's what really drew me to you. So
Well, I
tell
love that.
me
I
what your
appreciate.
yeah, tell me what your experience has been with the world of narcissism. Like, why do you talk about it? Why is it important to you? Have you been impacted or someone you know? Like,
Yeah, it's unfortunately direct impact. I was in a relationship with my ex for over a decade. We met when I was 23 and she was 31, and um because this was so I'm 38 now. So 15 years ago, the concept of narcissism wasn't really nearly as mainstream, and the term gaslighting certainly wasn't. So there was a lot of naivete that contributed to my ability to stay in that relationship for so long while a lot of things were unfolding. And it really wasn't until I had left that I could look back and acknowledge it as narcissism, because as the title of the live suggests, there are different types of narcissism, and I was only familiar with overt narcissism and this idea that people are, very charismatic and there's a lot of bravado,
mhm,
and there's sort of this inherent arrogance that goes with it. And my ex was what I would call a covert narcissist, who very much the opposite. I mean, there's still a tremendous amount, I think, of arrogance, but it's much more subtle and sort of manifests more as a do-gooder quality. Meanwhile, also constantly playing the victim. And if I had understood that that victim mentality was a red flag leaning towards narcissism, I think it would have become a lot more clear to me a lot
mhm,
faster. But unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of my learning really came after the fact, looking back and then sort of acknowledging, oh, that's something that that set me off, that made me understand that I wasn't, my nervous system wasn't regulated. I wasn't comfortable, but I didn't have the words or the knowledge, quite honestly, about mental health for myself,
mhm,
um, or the knowledge about people who would be so manipulative.
mhm, mhm. I think one of the saddest things that I noticed is people don't really understand what they were in until they're out of it. Kind of like
Yeah.
a tornado, like there are warnings, and but then it's when you step back and you look at the damage that it has done, and then you're like, dang, like
Man.
how, how did I spend so much time in this relationship and not know what was going on? So were there like clues or red flags or like things you missed?
So, all of the above. I would say the things that I missed were a little bit more willful or, again, naive. There was a substance abuse issue that I was really unaware of because I had never been in any sort of relationship, romantic or personally, where I was dealing with somebody who was hiding significant substance abuse issues. So that would be the thing that I would say I really missed.
Mhm.
Um, but the red flags, I can joke about it now, but I refer to it sort of as, when you watch a dog do an agility course and they're dodging all those flags, that's like what I was like. I was like, there's another red flag, and I'm just, it's cool, no worries. We're just gonna get through it, no big deal, right? And it's because I had set my mind on this idea of this is the type not this is the type of relationship I want. I want a relationship. I want to be loved. I'm a hopeless romantic. I extend my empathy. I assume that somebody who's showing up in a relationship with me would do the same. Um,
Mhm.
and what I learned in looking back, and I'm gonna say real quickly, I love the analogy they gave about it being like a tornado and looking back and assessing the damage, 'cause I got kind of like a full body response to that, like, "Oh, yeah, that's exactly what it's like." There's a lot of devastation and destruction that you can't anticipate, and I
Mhm.
think it can often be farther reaching than you even understand when you're in it.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I was in this, again, I was quite young, she was older than me, it was really the only relationship I had outside of college that was serious, and I there was lying from the beginning. I was being gaslit, but I didn't know the term for gaslighting, so all I knew was I felt like I was being lied to, but then I was also being made to feel like I was being unreasonable
Mhm.
because I was nervous, anxious, jealous, concerned about these things that are happening, and it started off as very little things. Her ex and she lived together when we met, so, like, red flag number 1, but I asked up front,
Oh, no.
I was like, "There's nothing still going on here, though, like, I'm not getting in the middle of something. No, 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 no. Okay." Um, she ends up moving out a week later, um, still trying to be friends with her ex. I was nervous about it. Long story short, 10 months later, she cheats on me with her ex, and I had said to her, "If anybody cheated, I wouldn't stay with them." And I feel like that was really kind of a test to me.
Mhm.
I mean, it certainly was for my own self-love and self-respect, but it was also, um, I think a way for her to sort of gauge my
She's
commitment to the
testing your
relationship.
boundaries.
A hu
She's
a hundred
testing. Uh-huh.
100%. And so at the time, I didn't know that. And so when that happened, she stayed at my house for like a month after the fact. Um, she was a contract employee. There's something really important to note here. She was professionally a behavioral specialist for children with autism. So there was this like altruistic component that I anchored on.
Oh, she must be a good person.
Yeah,
She's
100%.
helping she's helping she's helping people.
100%.
Uh-huh.
And because that arrogance wasn't there, it didn't appear as, "Oh, she's doing this with any ill intent." Now, do I believe that she did her work with ill intent? No, I don't. But do I believe that she leveraged her knowledge about behavioral science to manipulate me further? Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely, because it made her increasingly uncomfortable that I was asking questions and learning things about what she did. Because I'm a curious person and I like to
Mhm.
understand things, and I also wanna talk to my partner about the thing that they do.
Mhm.
Um, and so over the years, this would just kind of get worse and worse. It's so much to try to kind of consolidate into a real, compact story, but the thing that I will say is that it was little things like that, like all of these lies that would happen, and, I ended up obviously ultimately forgiving her because I stayed in the relationship for almost 10 years, but, or almost 12 years, I should say. But I think that what I was also really unaware of is how much I was, like, whittling away my own personality because it was so subtle over time, and
Mhm.
because I'm a really connective person, I wasn't losing touch with people the way that a lot of people who experience, abuse in relationships do, right? I wasn't fully isolated. I was keeping the connections that I had, but I was going to fewer things, or if I went to something, I was always going by myself because she didn't
Mhm.
wanna be involved, and
Mhm.
so there there was a lot that made me feel like, "Oh, well, it's my fault for wanting her to do things with me," and she's like, "I'm socially anxious, you don't understand," and the important thing also for me to say here is that early on and then throughout the relationship, there was this sort of slow drip of all these really tremendous traumas that she told me had happened to her.
Mhm.
I now looking back can't say with any sort of confidence what was true and what wasn't. I do believe something horrible must have happened because I've heard that, narcissists are bred, not born.
Mhm.
And so I think that part of it
There
is
was
whatever.
some trauma.
Yeah, whatever
Mhm.
trauma you had was obviously impacting you in a significant way, but it manifested as her just being like, "The world's against me and nothing's
Yeah.
ever gonna go my way." And, I took that with my savior complex and was like, "I can help you live a better life. I
Mhm.
can if I'm good enough, if I'm a good enough partner, if I show up in the ways that you need, even if that requires me sacrificing my own self, then you can live a better life and this will be good." And it was just such a delusion, quite
Yeah.
honestly, because
It's
I
like a
convinced myself that
push-pull.
yeah.
It's like a push-pull, like, you wanting to help her overcome the social anxiety or the trauma. But then the push was, how dare you ask me to challenge my social anxiety and go places because you already
Mm,
know what I've been through. And so it puts you in a rock and a hard place because you want to help, you wanna love her, you wanna support her, but then you're gaslight or guilt tripped or blamed when you try to push her out of her comfort zone. And then
yeah.
she had the proper terminology because she is coming from the
Yeah.
behavioral background field, and so I know there were probably so many arguments where she could run circles around you because she had the terminology, and so
Well, I would say that, and also I love that you called that out, and I appreciate your expertise in therapy to be able to make that point about the push and pull. And I think one of the things too was that because I will wholeheartedly admit that my conflict style is more intense and reactive,
Mhm.
whereas hers was more avoidant. And of course, as a good empath and anxious attachment, I was seeking somebody who was avoidant, and that was, really in conflict with what I needed to feel safe anyway. But again, these are all things I learned after the fact. And the thing that was really consistent with her as well was that it was there was always something that didn't add up. And we had lived in Pennsylvania for most of our relationship and moved out to Seattle when I got this job a few years back. And I was really hopeful that this would sort of shift gears. The financial stressors would be gone. I was definitely contributing more than she was. Like, I'd been unemployed for 6 months prior to that. And she wasn't really working either. And I was bleeding myself dry. So there were a lot of financial implications on me. She was on my health insurance, making sure that she
Mm.
had everything that she needed. And so, um, leading up to me ultimately leaving, there were a handful of extremely traumatic experiences that unfolded in my life as a result of her carelessness, her drug abuse, and me just being really oblivious, but also then um, too loyal, to be quite
Mm.
honest. Too loyal and self-abandoning.
Mhm.
I look back on it and I talk about this a lot in therapy. I actually said it yesterday in therapy, that the hardest thing for me to acknowledge looking back on all of it now, and not even acknowledge, but to feel, is the disappointment of how much I abandoned myself in the process. And I
Mhm.
think that's something that's really important for people to know. If you think that you are in a relationship with somebody who is narcissistic, or you are witnessing it for somebody else and you need to offer something, I ask yourself if it feels right to you. And it seems really simple. And trust me, I asked myself this question a lot when I was in it, but it's not just asking yourself and saying yes or no. I've learned a lot about what it feels like in your body. So when I talk about the nervous system, it is like my body responds to it. I feel it in my gut. Incredibly uncomfortable with the reality of what my life was, but I also understand that for me to get out of that, I had to reach a place of such tremendous discomfort that
Mhm.
I couldn't possibly stay.
Mhm. Oh, okay. I think there are different types of people. There are the type of people who have to see it out all the way to the end because they've poured so much time and so much energy I feel like sometimes people get into this kind of like savior complex,
Yeah.
I've got to see this project all the way to the end, and I
Yeah.
need that one last thing, that one last big thing. And I mean, it changes, and it's okay. No, no, no. Really, the next big thing that happens, I'm gone. And then you've got people on the other end of the spectrum who, and I feel like bounce back quicker, accept reality for what it is.
Man,
Like
I wish I
that,
had.
like that you can, it's like either the slow band-aid or the rip-off. So you got
Yeah.
people who they accept reality for what it is, they swallow the jagged pill, and then they start moving towards recovery. And then we know that it's on a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
But the more time and energy that you put into a relationship and into a person, and that shifts away from you to the person, then that's the motivating factor to keep going, right?
Yeah. That's a
Okay,
really good way
so
of putting it.
one of the number one things that I see with covert narcissists, and in my own personal experience, mine are not so easy. So mine is a family member,
Okay, yeah,
and
it's a
not
lot more
just
to
walk
go no
away.
contact.
Harder to walk away from, harder to put boundaries, but is the victim mentality, right? So, and it doesn't start with, hi, here's my sob story, right? It starts with, I could have been X, Y, and Z if I had not been through this.
Oh my gosh,
Or,
yeah.
or you see the potential in the person and you're like, oh my gosh, they're so incredibly smart and gifted and talented. And gosh, like they just got dealt a hard hand, right? And so, tell me a little bit more about like that victim mentality, and
Mm.
like with covert narcissists, do you also see like depressed, sad, withdrawn?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love the way you teed it up too, because it was very much my experience in terms of it's not it doesn't show up right away. There was sort of a sense of, I'm gonna say, like, confidence, but it wasn't arrogant, as I said. And she was a Division I athlete in college. Um, the first time that she revealed to me what trauma she had experienced was that there was a sexual assault of some kind, but she was very limited in what she shared. I still to this day wouldn't have all of the context, which I don't expect somebody to share necessarily. That's obviously deeply traumatic. So that's not really the point. It's just that it was sort of in drips and drabs too, where I recognize now looking back that it would sort of be a way to pull me back in when I was starting to leave. And I've
Mm,
actually talked about this in therapy quite a bit, because it was like I'd have one foot out the door, and as soon as that foot was out the door, either she would bring up a past trauma, guilt me about something that I had done, in reaction to the trauma that I had experienced because of what was going on in our relationship, or or some new trauma would happen, and now I'm in the throes of it. And so there was a sense that, yes, the world is against me. At one point, we were in couples therapy with somebody who ultimately was extremely unethical, but she she was carrying this victim mentality. My ex was carrying this victim mentality, and when I called it out in couples therapy, it was turned back on me that I'm basically victim blaming, shaming my ex, and I was trying to explain that that's very much not what this is. But if you are walking into situations saying, there verbatim, "There is a target on my back," then you're absolutely living in a victim mentality. I mean, that's point blank a statement that you would use to describe
mhm,
somebody who's in that state of mind. So
mhm,
it was really hard for me to feel like I could be in an environment where I was going to say thrive, but in reality, just I'm regulated. I
mhm,
don't feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop constantly.
mhm,
And so with somebody like that, you get dragged down to their level because of that victim mentality and that, "Oh, I could have been this, I could have been that, but then this happened." It's like, so what you've decided, what you're telling me right now is that you've decided that the things that have happened to you are going to dictate the events of the rest of your life. And if there's anything that I can say that I benefited from in terms of that, witnessing that, is that when I finally did make the choice to leave, I was like, "That's not gonna be me. I'm
mhm,
healing, like, my intention is to heal, to move through that and to do things like this to help other people understand that when you are in it, it is so hard to understand what better looks like. It's nearly impossible because you can't fathom it. You're wrapped up in it. Your entire body, brain, and emotional attention is directed towards that. But when
Mhm.
you leave, it is like the like clouds have parted and the sun is shining down on you, and you're like, oh my God, look at this infinite potential that lays in front of me because I'm choosing that better is possible. It doesn't just happen inherently, but when you put the effort in, I had a moment yesterday where I literally was in therapy and I was like, "Yes, I'm so excited about this. I'm so happy that I've gotten to this point." And to feel that joy after feeling such despair because of somebody else's, I don't wanna just call it negativity, but that there is a very negative component to it because of
Mhm.
that negative mindset and also just the drain of energy that
Oh, yeah.
happens when somebody is so manipulative like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I wanna let everyone know it definitely depends on the person's narcissistic, like, trauma, like, what they've been through depends on how isolated, how withdrawn, how depressed they will be, right? And so
Mhm.
what you're explaining is someone who had actual traumatic events happen to them, not just perceived, but actual traumatic events happen to them. And therefore, this is how it was the driving motivation for how she's decided to live her life. And
Yeah.
so there are some covert narcissists who it's more of a perceived, like, you know, my mom hated me, or, my boss hated me. And those facts probably, I mean, could have some validity to them, but not necessarily true. And so they go around trying to figure out who they can convince that there's this is the way they feel so that they can in turn get supply. So I
Yeah.
think some people, it is very manipulative up front. They know what they're doing, they know what their end gain is. And then there are some people who have actually been through a lot and just honestly feel like the world hates them and
I will
everything.
Sorry, I will say though that I think it became that.
Oh,
Whether it did or didn't start there,
mhm.
because by the end of it, as I'm saying, the target's on my back, etcetera, the experiences that were happening, and I'm going to very briefly summarize because there's far too much nuance to
Okay.
try to explain the whole thing in a short amount of time, but there were at least 3 incidents that I can recall. One where she claimed to have been, she would go missing, like, randomly for several hours, where I would be like, "Where are you?" Non-responsive, whatever. This is as she's feeding her drug habit at this point too, which, again, I'm unaware of because I think she's working or doing something else that she's told me she's doing. Um, and I also didn't know what it looked like when somebody was high in the way that she was. So
Mhm.
that was hard for me because she would tell me that she was dissociating. And this couples therapist bought into the idea that she was dissociative. In retrospect, I can tell you I'm fairly confident that that is not what was happening, but this was being used to manipulate me into just allowing sort of free reign to do whatever you want and screw up my life in the process. Was she had allegedly gotten abducted in my car, but then the police find her and or sorry, she came back randomly without the car. They find my car, which has been stolen, allegedly. But the story from the people who she was dealing with related to the drugs does not match her story. And the police, now, granted, who to trust in this situation, really hard to say. But the police said to me, I would be very conscious of the fact that some people are living double lives. And I went to bat like, "You don't know. You're not trauma informed. She's been through so much." Da, 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 da. And then she goes on to get a DUI where I'm fighting the same battle for her because she had taken, like, I guess maybe a ton of Xanax. I don't really remember at this point. Um, and then the final straw, because you said some people, right? There's like a maybe this time, maybe that time. Okay, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. And by the way, the night that the quote unquote abduction happened, this is absurd for me to even be saying. I'm kind of reliving it and being like, I just can't believe how naive I was. But she was deleting text messages that were very clearly related to something drug related. But again, I didn't understand because I don't do these
Oh,
things.
you
I
didn't have
don't know.
all of the it was
Okay, yeah.
you didn't
It's
have
easy
the
to put it
full all the
together.
yeah, yeah.
And then the last straw was, um, that ultimately I left, like, during COVID, to go back to the East Coast to be with my family was, um, she had, by the way, totaled my car 3 times, and
Mm.
I'm telling her that she can't drive, and the therapist is like, "You're trying to take away her autonomy," and I'm like, "I'm trying to not
Trying to keep
deal
her
with all."
safe.
Yeah, 100%. And so, the last time she nearly totaled my car, um, she was supposed to be at work, she was several hours late. I had started to get this gut instinct where I just knew before I was getting the call that something bad had happened, that something bad had happened, so my nervous system was on high alert, I was hypervigilant. And I had a dash cam in my car at that point because the car kept getting crashed and the explanations didn't make any sense. And unfortunately, I didn't have one facing in at the time, but it was facing out. And I see that she's driven to a homeless encampment. She has picked somebody up and she is doing heroin in my car as a police car is driving by and telling me that she doesn't remember it while I have audio of her lying to me on the phone about where she is and telling me then that she is dissociated and she doesn't remember any of that and that she doesn't understand why she's going through such a severe withdrawal when she's only done heroin once. Meanwhile, I have one of my best friends from like my hometown where I grew up said to me whose sister has dealt with issues with drug abuse, specifically heroin for years, was like, "Nikki, I'm telling you right now, that's not the first time that she's done it." And
No.
so my whole world just
Yeah.
exploded because I was like, "Okay, at what point do I stop lying to myself?"
That it's full circle. It's full circle. So we started the conversation with who are you and what do you want? And during the duration of the relationship, you lost both.
Yeah.
You lost
Yeah.
you were detached to who you were. And if someone walked up to you and said, "Hi, I'm a heroine. Do you want to be committed to me?" You'd probably run the other way.
Right.
But your expectations over time dropped because then there's this hierarchy of needs, right? Like you just want to be okay. You stop
Yeah.
considering what your non-negotiables are, what your type is at this point, what you will and it's just like can we wake up and have a normal week without there being an arrest or drama? Do you see like at the same time how both of these things are kind of dwindling at the same time, right?
Yeah, I love the way that you just framed that, Yori, too, and specifically because what I didn't realize was how much I was shrinking, and I was at my friend's 40th birthday recently, and I was meeting a bunch of people that I've heard of but hadn't actually met in person, and then this is one of my dearest friends, soul family, and she's so excited and so vibrant about how, like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so happy. This is my friend Nikki. Here's everything, like, she's in such a good place. This is her amazing wife, da da da." And she's like, I'm so excited about this and for you to meet her now because I just watched her shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And it's so beautiful to see like how you've come back to yourself and just become more yourself in this process. And as hard as it is, I think to some degree to hear somebody because many of my friends and family have said like it was just we were watching you dwindle, right? And be
Mhm.
so committed to the life that I wanted that I wouldn't acknowledge that this was never gonna be it. And so,
Dang, Nikki, how far into the relationship did you realize it was never gonna be that? Like, what
honestly, e when did I realize it versus when was I willing to, acknowledge that is probably different. I think I probably knew from the beginning, if I'm being honest with myself. I just lacked self-love, and I had no idea how desperately I was clinging to the idea of somebody being able to love me the way I loved them. And I'd say it was probably about on we got married about 6 years in. I don't think we should have gotten married. I went to therapy because I was trying to, like, convince myself that it was, like, kind of me that was the problem that was feeling hesitant or anxious about things. I had written tons of things that I've gone back to in the past couple of years where in the same sort of breath, so to speak, in writing, I'm talking about how this isn't making me happy. It's not satisfying. I feel unfulfilled, stress, all these things. And then going, but and justifying to myself why I'm going to continue to stay for these breadcrumbs that are being offered. They're
Mhm.
basically the way I would describe a narcissist, at least in my experience, is they give you a breadcrumb and tell you it's a feast. And
Mhm.
you're just like, what am I like?
Oh, add this to it, Nikki. And you're so starving and deprived that the breadcrumb starts to actually feel like it's fulfilling. That
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you said you didn't even kind of realize what your non-negotiables were anymore. The thing that I have said so many times, and if people who follow me are listening, you're going to hear it again. Best thing I could have done for myself was making a list of my wants, needs, and deal breakers, and not thinking about that in terms of the person that I want, but just what are the things that I absolutely need to feel
Mhm,
safe, comfortable, happy in a relationship? What are things that I would like to have that are still very important to me? And what are the things that I absolutely will not stand for? Now,
mhm,
granted, that list was comprised of many of the things I've described here today, right?
mhm,
The I don't want this, I will never deal with this again.
mhm,
But I had never asked myself really what I wanted, really what I needed. All I knew was that I
mhm,
wanted to be loved.
mhm,
That's not enough. You got to know yourself. And the way you started the conversation is exactly right. And I think that we spend a lot of time early in our lives, at least I did, thinking about this idyllic view of what a real romance and love and connection would be. And when I met somebody who didn't even honestly really fit that bill in terms of any of the wants, needs, and deal breakers, if I look back at it, um, I felt some sort of attraction. And then I set my sight on it and I was like, this is what I'm going to do now.
mhm,
And I latched onto the idea despite what, as you said earlier, reality was showing me, and
mhm,
I also ended up living in her reality
mhm,
instead of my own, and that's what
mhm,
happens when you self-abandon, which I feel is, like, the self-abandonment, the contrast of that with the self-love that I have now is so profound that it's almost impossible to look back and not have that feeling of, "Come on, like, what were you doing?"
No, no, and what you said, what happens is I think people kinda know what they want. They kinda know what their deal breakers are. I mean, we know we want to be respected, loved, kinda we want honesty. But then what happens is when someone comes, we start to feel guilty, or am I asking for too much?
Mm.
Or let me give them some more time to show me these qualities, or so we start to feel like my expectations are too high, or I'm being too judgmental, or I'm not giving them a chance, or oh, they could show me this, but they've been through this, so they need some time to heal from that. And then once they heal from that, they'll be able to show us this. So,
You know my story.
yes, I know your story. I know your story. Okay, so what would you leave someone, let's just say someone's watching and they are feeling like they're asking themselves, are they happy? And then they're sitting back and they're saying, you know what, like the majority of the time I'm not. There are moments that are really good. We're fun, we have a lot of fun together, and but the bad outweighs the good. And they're still trying to, like, they're in that limbo where they're trying to get the good to catch up with the bad, but like months are going by, years are going by, like,
Yeah, I,
like, when do you just cut your losses and go? Like, what would you
as
say?
fast as you can, as
It's
fast as you can. I that's a lot easier said than done, I know that,
it
because
is.
you made a comment earlier about the time invested piece of it, and I think a lot of us hinge on the, "I've spent a lot of time here, I'm just gonna try to make it work." Um, a friend of mine that I met through the podcast, she had made a comment that when you are in a she's a divorce recovery coach. When you are in a toxic relationship or just an unhealthy relationship, maybe it's just not the right one for you, hope is the last thing to die, which
Mhm.
is profound and bleak all at the same time.
Mhm.
And it resonated a lot with me because I think that if you if you feel that there is an uneven dynamic between you and the person that you're with, between the positives and the negatives of the relationship, you really need to, as best you can, and I say this knowing full well that it is much easier objectively to say this now that I'm out of it than to be in it and have this perspective. But my hope is that if you're listening to this and that indicates that the wheels are turning, my friend, and
Mhm.
you've got questions, we've got answers. And the biggest thing that I can say is that you need to trust yourself. And when you are with a narcissist, it is one of the hardest things to do because their entire MO is to get you to not trust yourself
Mhm.
so that they can keep manipulating you. Trust yourself anyway.
Mhm.
Trust that you know what you need to be happy. And if you are not happy, you know that you are not happy. It's not magically going to get better. And the
Mhm.
other thing that I will say is that you had noted that, we have this idea of like, well, if I just do this, then they will. If I just do this, then they will. No, they won't. They won't.
Mm-mm.
That's not
Mm-mm.
who they are. That's not what they're here to do. The
Mhm.
fact that you are continuously trying to improve yourself is great. That means that when you leave the relationship, you are proving to yourself that you can do it. You can move on. You can live a better, healthier, happier life. If you are waiting for your happiness to come at the hands of somebody else who very much is proving to you that they don't do the work, you are wasting your time. And I mean that in the most loving and respectful way possible
Mhm.
because I wasted my time. Now, that
Mhm.
said, if you feel like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do or how I'm gonna get out of this. I get that the complications, especially if you have children or to your point, Yuri, if they're your family member, things like that, there are a lot of complexities in making the choice to depart situations like this, go no contact and prioritize yourself. But the only way that you are going to live the life that you want to feel safe, happy, and fulfilled is to do that for yourself. So surround yourself with people who are able to listen, to provide that safe space, to offer the comfort that you need, and know that you aren't alone in this process.
Mhm.
And as much as a narcissist will want you to think that you are not.
You are 100% true. And I want to also add to that, continue sharing your story and your experience because when you are trying to talk to a narcissist and explain your experience, your story, what you feel, it's going to get shut down. And so,
Mhm.
if you are no longer able to verbalize how you feel, what you're going through, then that is also a form of isolation. Isolation is not just, oh, I can't see and touch people. It is also a manipulative, it's a mind, your mind is in jail, your feelings are in jail, your
Yeah.
stories in jail because there's no one to hear it. And so I would say, when we say surround yourself with people, you are surrounding yourself with people and you are talking. You are
Yes.
sharing. If you're embarrassed to share your story, how you feel, what you've experienced, if that is not valued by your spouse, your partner, that's another indication.
I was gonna say major red
Yeah,
flag,
yeah,
right? Because
another indication that it's time to go. Right.
yeah, it's in if you feel like your feelings are in if you can tell your feelings are being invalidated, mine were invalidated by my ex and the couples therapist, which then made it feel even more so like, "Oh my gosh, like what am I
Mhm.
doing to have these feelings?" And the thing that was really problematic for me at the time too is that I'm describing all these extremely traumatic experiences to you, very objectively a little bit detached from the emotional aspect of it
Mhm.
for my own sanity.
Yeah, of course.
But nobody knew about that except for my therapist. Thanks to her, she's honestly been a lifesaver. I appreciate what you do, Yuri. Like, we need
I'm
mental
shocked
health
you even
providers.
I am shocked that you even decided to go back into therapy. That's I guess we'll follow up with that on your podcast, like,
Yeah.
rebuilding trust with, like, a therapist again after
Well,
you.
this was a
Yeah,
different
no, no,
therapist.
no, I'm
Oh,
saying
okay.
that, but there are some times where people are like, "Tried it, been there, that was traumatic for me,
Well, it was
not doing
actually
that."
simultaneous. So I was the couple's therapist. I was with my therapist,
Oh, so you
first,
had some
and then
mhm.
yeah, so I was actually really lucky because my therapist, I've been with her for almost 6 years, is the most ethically sound, compassionate person who was there for all of it.
Mhm.
And shout out to all of the therapists because I had a great guest on my show, Jenny Hughes, who has a program called Brave Providers for Trauma Therapists
Okay.
to connect with other trauma therapists because
Oh,
of how much you all take on.
yeah.
If you're wanting, I'll connect you to. She's a
Please
great
connect us.
person.
Yeah.
But what I love is that like she taught me about how, you know, with when you share things with people, I think you often worry that you're going to be a burden to somebody. And part of that, if it's on repeat, is this idea of vicarious trauma. You get compassion fatigue, you feel like you're getting all of the intensity of somebody's experience. But the flip side of that, which I really value and love and like sharing with people, is this idea of vicarious resilience. So if you're worried that I don't want to tell people this because they'll feel this way or I'm going to burden them. Well, think about it this way. Maybe they'll feel some type of way, but they might not, and they probably won't in my experience. They just want to be there to support you. But then when you get out and you are shining your light and you are the best version of yourself, they are there for it. The vicarious resilience, they are your biggest cheerleaders. They are so excited. I had a friend who sent me a video message with tears in her eyes when she got the news that my divorce was finalized. Like she was
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
happy for me. And when I met my wife now, who's just this absolute amazing human being who is a major part of my healing process, it's like people are just like, look at how happy you are. Look at how amazing it is. You got out of that and you are now living the life you deserve.
Yeah.
Go live the life that you deserve. You know you deserve better. It's not as easy as like, okay, I don't want to be here. I'm just going to leave for everybody. But like I said, trust that you know that
Mhm.
this isn't right for you.
Mhm.
It's kind of the most obvious, but the most important thing.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, Nikki, where can they find you? Where can they find you? Because I
Yeah,
know after they see this, I mean, it's one thing hearing it from somebody who lived it, but it's another thing hearing it from someone who lived it and is now in a happy and successful relationship.
oh, it's so great.
We don't hear, especially like on TikTok, social media, like we hear, I'm going through it. I went through it. Very rarely do we hear, I went through it and now like I'm happy. I
Yeah,
feel fulfilled. I am in therapy. So like you are like the full story, right? So
it's thank
where
you for
can they
saying that.
find you?
Yeah, you can, so as you already said, my podcast is Can I Just Say, the website is canijustsaypodcast.com. You can also find me on any of the social medias at Nikki La Croce, and, if you wanna put that in any sort of notes, so people don't have to guess how to spell it. It's on the screen now, it's just at that. But I will say also, I have done a couple of guest spots on some other shows where I share a little bit more about my story, and
Mhm.
so, if you wanna share if, you want, I can share those links with you, Yori, for
Yeah, and
people who
then
it might be helpful because it's specifically about narcissism.
yeah. And then you are also linked to my live and my stories. And
Perfect.
then I will put this in my comment section so that people can find you. I thank you so so much. This is not our last conversation because
I sure hope not.
I want to hear the full thing. Like I want to hear I want to hear the full thing. I want to hear how you rebuilt trust. I want to hear how you found yourself. So I want to hear the whole thing. So we will definitely continue this conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a beautiful, wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next Friday. If you are interested in sharing your story, your testimony, your journey, then please contact me and you might be our next guest. See you soon. Thank you, Nikki.